Welcome to the Media People Podcast, the show where we speak to the people who make up the media industry to learn about where they started, where they are now, and the stories in between. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. Nikki Hawke is a staple in the Canadian media world. She's held senior marketing positions at major companies like CTV, Canwest, Atlantis, and Corus. Nikki even spent time working for Showtime in the US. But just as media is becoming digital first, so has Nikki's career. She's currently Vice President, Global Marketing for the Exchange Lab. Nikki chats with us about growing up in Toronto, attending university in Quebec and New York City, and the marketing differences between TV stations and digital media firms. Thanks for joining us, Nikki.
Thanks for having me.
And I wanted to say, this is episode 3 of the Media People Podcast, and you are the first Canadian we've ever had. Congratulations, even though we are a Canadian-based podcast.
That's incredible. Thank you.
So going back to the beginning, we know you're from Canada. We just established that, gave that away to the audience, but where in Canada are you from?
I'm from Toronto.
So as a child, born and raised in Toronto?
Born and raised in Toronto. Proud to be from Toronto. Love it.
And growing up in Toronto, what were some of your passions? Would you say you were an artist, musician, athlete? Kind of like, what did you gravitate towards?
I would say quite a mix. I went to a few schools in Toronto when I was younger. Always loved sports. Grew up skiing on weekends all through my teens, and then was a ski instructor. Taught swimming. My parents really thought a mix was really important, but then I loved the arts and sort of gravitated towards them. Lots of art classes, drama, things like that, extracurricular activities as well.
Interesting note about sports. So you said skiing and you said swimming. So you had kind of both seasons covered. And one thing I noticed about them too is that they're very independent sports. They're things that you can do on your own. Was that something that attracted you to those sports, or it just kind of panned out that way? That's what you were introduced to?
Actually, it's funny. Skiing for me was a team sport until the very end, because I don't know if you ever followed skiing, but back in the day, Nancy Green and Mountain Dew were team sports. So your points went against the team, and only when you were older and started racing division or doing things like that was it individual. But so no, I love team sports, and swimming was just something I loved. Sort of a fish. I'm a Pisces, so it's cheesy as that is.
Did you do any competitive swimming?
A little bit, yeah, and just in high school.
I did as well. What was your event?
Front crawl. You?
Front crawl? Breaststroke.
Awesome.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at it. I was the slowest one, and I picked the slowest and the easiest stroke to go with. Okay, and then you mentioned the arts as well. Like, I mean, we're painting, sculpting, were you a musician? You mentioned drama, though, that you touched on that.
Yeah, I mean, actually a lot of things. I tried to do piano when I was really little. My grandmother was a concert pianist. She was amazing. It wasn't really my strength, but I loved music. And then I actually took tuba, don't laugh.
I'm not laughing at that, no.
7 and 8, and was really good. Did the Kiwanis Music Festival here in Toronto.
I'm very familiar with that music festival.
Yeah, and then, just like loved singing and then acting, doing drama. Used to do courses at Second City here in Toronto.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Just and then also art and sculpture and all that too. Just really loved it all.
So just anything artistic you threw yourself into then, like real. I guess you probably came from a real family of idealists then, because that's really what art's rooted in.
I guess so. I think my parents, both of my parents are really creative, but they grew up in the medical profession. So,
interesting.
Yeah, having 2 daughters who are actually now in like the creative professions is interesting for them, because I think as we went on our journey of developing ourselves as into adults in our careers, they really didn't know how to help because they came from the medical profession, but they always had a passion for the arts.
Okay, and speaking of your parents, were they influences for you growing up? Was there anyone else, say, I don't know, a teacher, another relative, a friend?
I would say lots of people. My best friend from growing up actually was an artist for many years, like a painter. And I found I gravitated towards creative people. My dad's written several books and is quite a great photographer.
Oh,
and
nice.
His mom was the one that was a concert pianist and a sculptor. And then, just lots of people in my life who are very into fashion and the arts, etc.
Okay, and then you clearly did a lot of this through high school, but one thing you mentioned to me about high school is in your last year you went to boarding school. You moved away. Where did you go?
I went to Trinity College School in Port Hope.
For anyone who's listening, where is Port Hope? We got to
So
identify
Port
that.
Hope is 1 hour east of Toronto. It's beautiful. I loved it. It was the year that sort of changed my life, and I was really lucky because I wasn't doing that well at the time in high school, and my grandfather sort of ponied up to send me to boarding school for the year, and it made all the difference in my life, I would say.
What was really the turning point for you at boarding school versus, like, say, conventional high school?
I think it was honestly that the community itself was like a family, and there was peer pressure to work hard and do well. So, often in high school or at schools, socializing becomes very important as a teenager. And at this school, it was really important to participate in sports, participate in extracurriculars, do well in school, work hard. You couldn't really get away with anything. And I think I really thrived in that environment.
And then from there, you went on to college, university.
Yep.
Where was it?
I went to Bishop's University in Lennoxville, Quebec.
And that's the one. That's the one that's really close to the Vermont border, correct?
It is. It's really close to the Vermont border. So as a skier, I liked that. But also, I picked Bishop's actually in the end because it was a small environment as well. And there were some classes I had through university which had 6 students in the class. And then there were some that had hundreds of students in the class. But it was a smaller community, and that really seemed to fit with me.
I checked. I was reading up on Bishop's in advance of the interview, and I noticed that literally on Wikipedia, when you rank by student body population, like, Bishop's is probably maybe the 5th or 6th smallest in Canada, like 2,200 full-time students.
Yep.
And that's it. That's as big as some people's high school.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great too, because then you really get to know the community, and you get to know people in all different years, and you get to know people through sports and extracurricular activities, and I really like that.
I went to Brock, and we had a pretty big rivalry with your school for lacrosse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back and forth every year. It'd either be Brock or it'd be Bishop's.
Amazing.
And living in Quebec in general, how was that? Because, again, that was your first time that. And I know when you were at Port Hope, you were away from Toronto, but still, it's pretty close by being an hour away. But what was it like going to Quebec? Was it a bit of a culture shock, or was it?
It was great. Lennoxville is a very English-speaking town in Quebec City, but I was there during the referendum, which was a really interesting time.
Oh, okay.
And Montreal is not that far. I had lots of people at McGill and Concordia, so I got to go up and visit there. I personally love Quebec. I love the environment. I love the French language, although I'm not very good at it. So I loved being there.
I think, and not to go into detail on it, I think that was pretty interesting to be there at a time when it was very politically motivated, to be starting out in university. Because I got to imagine that if you took any political science courses, or even the debate on campus, a lot of it was shaped by the referendum. That's what was in your face all the time.
Absolutely.
But you didn't take politics. What did you take instead when you were there?
I took sociology was my major, which I absolutely loved. I actually started in English and sort of switched into sociology, and with a double major with rocks for jocks, as they called it, which was geography.
Yep, I've heard that before.
And a minor in women's studies.
What attracted you then to, say, geography, and then same question for women's studies as your minor?
Women's studies was just sort of like an offshoot of sociology in general, and I guess I would call myself a bit of a feminist in some ways, and I just loved the courses. And geography, I just took one in my first year sort of as an extra course, and loved it. It was sort of a bridge between sociology and economics, and a lot of the teachers were phenomenal at Bishop's, and just really, really I love traveling, love learning about the world, so...
Okay, and then after you finished at Bishop's, did you go traveling? Did you go get a job? What happened next?
I did. I came home from Bishop's after 3 years. I didn't stay to do honors. I think that was a little bit of influence from my parents because they weren't really sure if I'd ever go to graduate school or not. And I came home and started working actually in finance, surprisingly. So I worked at Scotia McLeod as sort of a temp and saved money to travel Africa for 4 months.
So not only did you have your first non-media job, not counting your part-time gigs, but you went through Africa. What was that like?
That was an incredible time of my life.
I mean, clearly it's pretty hard to hit the entire continent, and in some places it's a little unstable, but what were the key countries that you hit? I mean, what impressed you? Any moments where you're like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I didn't realize until after the fact that I actually was at some point scared during my trip. I mean, we got some of the people that I traveled with got robbed. Some people got malaria. I actually did a lot of the southern continent. I did 10 countries over the course of 3.5 months. So I started in South Africa, moved up the west, Namibia, Botswana, then across Zambia, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya.
Mozambique, by any chance, did you get into there?
No, not Mozambique.
Okay.
But I guess what I loved is I was backpacking and staying at hostels. So I did feel like I got to see a lot of the country. I got to meet some of the people. I got to meet lots of amazing travelers from all over the world. And just, it's a spectacular landscape and country. And, in my future, I really hope that I get to go back and can contribute in some way, whether that's by building a schoolhouse or volunteering my time, but it's something now that I'm an adult that I'd like to do moving forward.
See, the one flaw I find about just the way education works in Canada, or maybe it's just the culture, is we don't put enough of a premium on traveling. Like when I did backpacking too, after I had finished my many years of school, I was running into a lot of people from, say, England or Australia who were doing that gap year where they were like, you know what, I need a year after high school to find myself. And the one thing that really promoted that was the fact that a lot of those universities would hold on to your acceptance for a year and say, think about it and get back to us in 8 or 9 months. So yeah, no, I don't blame you for doing that. And then after you got back to Canada, was there a bit of shock for you? Like, how it is when you move back and you're like, oh, it's not the way it was the last 4 months. And you kind of have to re-find yourself or reintegrate.
I think what was hard for me is that a lot of my friends were still in university, so there was a bit of a gap because I'd done 3 years. So it was sort of meeting new people and trying to figure out my career. So I had applied to do a graduate certificate in PR at Humber, and I got accepted. So it was just sort of the months between traveling in Africa and starting my certificate course that I sort of filled working, at bars and different things like that. But then once I started on the journey sort of towards marketing and communications, I really felt like I found myself in my place.
Okay, so what was life at Humber like? Because, that's the PR program's pretty big. And if you search for anyone's LinkedIn profile, anyone that's in PR, I want to say if they're in Toronto or in Canada, 7 out of 10 of them probably have that PR postgrad diploma.
Yeah, I personally think it's the preeminent program in public relations in Canada. And it was phenomenal. It was hard work. Like, it was a very intense program. I'm still friends with people there from there today. I hire a lot of interns out of the Humber PR program because I think it is amazing. So it was really great for me.
PR is really grueling, and I always reconcile that back to politics, because every time something goes wrong in a political office, we'll pick on our prime minister, for example, it's usually the PR officer or the communications officer that takes the boot, even though they're probably taking direction from a higher power.
Yeah, I think crisis communications is really important for a lot of companies, and that stems from PR.
And then after Humber, I guess this was your foray into the media world full time. So where did you start?
Yeah, so outside of, when you finish Humber, you're supposed to do sort of an internship for credits. So I had done a lot of internships going into the course. So I started immediately at an advertising agency doing PR for that ad agency, and then quickly discovered that the one sort of pillar of communications and just doing PR was too siloed for me, and I really wanted to look at marketing communications holistically. So that I got a job at McLaren McCann working on the GM business, and that sort of then pushed me into sort of the advertising media world.
That's huge. I've had a chance to work on GM as a rep before, and if there's any place you really want to cut your teeth where, they've got the budgets to do all the really crazy and exciting things, but to also invest in the conventional side of media as well, you learn a lot working with them. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, it was incredible training ground. And also I would say the retail business, because it's not brand, it's so fast paced. Like every day it's a different, offer and deal, and working for the Ontario dealers was really, really interesting.
And then after that, you did find your way, what we like to call the dark side. You left the agency world, you came over to the media supplier side, and then you were at places like, say, Bell Media. What was that? Or sorry, CTV at the time.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
I loved it. That was my first, I'd wanted to work in entertainment and television, I think probably since I was a kid, and was passionate about it, but didn't really know ever how to sort of transition my way into a career that way. And I loved it. And the role that I had when I was at CTV was a contract role, but it was pretty unique in that it was the launch of Canadian Idol, and I also got to work on the Junos. And so it was convergent marketing in essence. It was like using CTV's properties to help promote those shows, which was really exciting. So I got to know a lot of people in different departments and, learned that I really love the entertainment side of the business.
And Canadian Idol, when you go back to its very first year, that was a huge deal. That was probably the first major American reality TV franchise that made its way north of the border.
Yeah, it did, and they did a great job to huge success, and now we've seen it, other shows come to Canada and have success, like The Bachelor and Deal or No Deal Canada, etc.
They've had Big Brother, right? I believe.
Yep, Big Brother Canada is a great show, Shaw Media.
Okay, and then as your career progressed, you decided to go back to school.
I did. I had actually applied for my master's degree sort of when I came out of the agency world, needing a break. I think most people that have worked in the agency side of the business know it's pretty grueling. It's really long hours. And I had deferred it for a year and just sort of decided that I really wanted to do it, which is a hard choice to make, as I am sure you know, because you said you also did a graduate degree. When you're, bordering on 30, it's a lot of money, it's moving, and it's taking a pause on your career. But
and you've got friends and family around you saying, you're crazy, what are you doing?
Yeah, I literally did. My parents weren't that supportive at first, and then I sort of convinced them it was the right thing to do, and I went to New York and did a Master's of Media Studies, which is at the New School. It's a theoretical and practical master's, so you learn editing and filmmaking and pitching television, writing, research, and the theory side. So it was wonderful, and again, one of those sort of pivotal points in my own personal growth and career.
Talk a bit about the difference between, and also keeping in mind, I know we can't go apples to apples because you're comparing an undergraduate to a graduate degree, but what was the difference between, say, university at the New School and at Bishop's?
I think it's just a sense of maturity by the time you're 30. You've worked a lot, and I knew what I was interested in, and the courses, as I said, were more practical, where at university it's quite theoretical. And, New York's a really interesting town, like great teachers. We went out and shot films. I got to pitch a television show to executive from Oxygen Media. It's just really interesting and exciting.
But something else happened to you there when you were doing your master's. You also landed a very nice internship at Showtime. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I did. So as part of the program, they offered an internship at Showtime, which is Viacom Media. And I applied and won it, in essence. So it was a paid internship. And I got to work there for a few months and then was asked to be hired on contract as well. And I loved it. I mean, it was a huge company, amazing brand to work on. They were launching incredible shows. So it was a really great experience.
And you mentioned you were account manager on Showtime. Tell us a little bit about what that's like, simply because the term account manager in Canada usually gets associated with a rep. But I know Showtime is like HBO. They don't have commercials.
So it was more on the brand side, so
Okay.
marketing the shows to consumers. So what the position was at the time was sort of a bridge between the creative department and all the brand managers. So basically being that in between, writing the briefs, making sure that things were on brand, working with the creatives to make sure that they understood the creative direction, and then getting approvals on creative. So like outdoor billboards, print ads, promo spots, key photography, things like that.
Which shows were keeping you your busiest? Because I think this generation or people today, when they hear Showtime, they're probably thinking Homeland.
Yeah, I mean, it was like back in the day. So I'm trying to think of, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think of some of the shows that I worked on at the time. I'm going to have to look them up for you.
That's okay. We'll say it's the channel that's got Homeland for the most part. And so then after everything wrapped up there, your internship, you graduated, you came back to Canada.
I did.
Did you find you had to reintegrate yourself back into the working world here, or because anyone that I know that goes down to New York, they always say that it's longer hours, a little bit more fast-paced, and that the one thing that they admired about Toronto, or they missed about it, was that it was a little bit slower and you had a little bit more chance to breathe and methodical. Was that the case, or was it just the same?
I guess so. I just am not that personality. I'm just really driven, so I don't feel like I took much of a break. But I was really lucky because the first job I applied to when I got back to Toronto was my job at Global Television. And I got it, and I was there, aside from a small, like, temporary 6 months at Corus, for almost 5 years. And that's really where I grew and developed a lot of my career.
What's some of the work from your Canwest days or Global days that, you're proud of, or some of the stuff that you had the most fun doing?
We won a Promax award for our campaign to launch season 6 of 24. So, what I'm proud of is, like, when it comes to serial television or primetime television, a lot of it is selling series to consumers that continue. So, like, I think I worked on 12 seasons of Survivor. So it's what's the new hook? How are we getting consumers into this? Same with House, 24, 6 or 7 seasons. I worked on the Super Bowl, and actually we threw a huge party in Detroit when it was on for
nice.
Global television, and also did our first sort of live hits with ET Canada from there, which I organized a lot of. So there was just a lot of really interesting, fun things about it. And I worked for some really amazing bosses who were really strategic and learned a lot from.
And you spent a lot of time on the content side of things, and then you made the jump to Juice Mobile. And this is where I think it's interesting with your career, and it kind of reflects the way the world is going too, is because, you've been working on, and I used to be in television as well, where literally the programming was the face of the company more than anything else. And now it's kind of like data is the face of the company. You're not talking about who the actors are, what the narrative of that program is. You're delving into so much more. So when you made the jump to Juice, was there a bit of a learning curve? Did you kind of have to recalibrate how you would approach marketing a big media company?
Well, I think the difference was that, like, I've grown up as a consumer marketer, and then I, switched my career into B2B, basically business to business marketing, just my role prior to Juice. But what I loved about going to digital is it's so fast paced, and mobile especially, and sort of being on the cusp of where the industry is going. And like you, I love learning. So it was a real fit for me. And I also find it really easy to work for companies or people that I believe in. And Neil Sweeney, who's the CEO and president of Juice Mobile, was an old colleague and a peer from Canwest. And he was really on the cutting edge of what the future of mobile looks like, and creating products that really work for advertisers. So I loved it.
And then after that, you landed here where you are now at the Exchange Lab.
Yeah, and I love it here too. And programmatic media, as you know, is basically the future of media. It's how all media is going to be traded probably down the road. And
you didn't even say bought, you said traded. So
traded.
That's exactly the way it's going. It's like a giant stock exchange. I've tried to explain it to some people, and I'm like, no, it really is going to be that way.
You know what? And I'm passionate about this job and area of digital specifically because, as you know, it's so confusing, and there's so much jargon, and so many people talk about being the experts. And as a communicator first and foremost, and a marketer, I think it's really important to first educate people and try to make sense of it all. And so that's what I am passionate about.
Well, kudos to the Exchange Lab, because one thing that they did very early on when a lot of the trading desks or outside trading desks started to pop up is that they were branding everyone. I remember seeing a lot of their reps or any of their marketing people wearing the lab coats. That was a really big thing. You know what? It stood out. It stood out, and it got a lot of attention, and I think it worked very well for them. But anyways, you know what? We're going to wrap it up now. I'm going to close with the last question. It's a question I ask everyone. If you weren't in media, and you can't say I'd only ever be in media, what do you think you'd be doing with your life instead?
I think I would be writing novels or being a writer.
Perfect. Nikki, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's show. For more episodes, go to soundcloud.com/mediapeoplepodcast and follow me on Twitter @VicGenova.